In this video, I will go over how to use our Create Workset application to create worksets for our workspace. This is specifically for the case of you are not an ODOT employee and you're trying to create the workset outside of ProjectWise. So that'd be on your local drive or network drive. That's what this video is going to go over. If that's not the case, I have other videos to go over those different scenarios. And so before we get into the application itself, one thing you want to make sure is that your Bentley project is configured to actually be able to see this workspace, right? Part of the reason being is this application is going to launch your Bentley project behind the scenes and do some things to finish off the creation of the workset. And the only way it can do that is if it can actually find that workspace and workset. So if you launch your Bentley project, I'll just launch MicroStation. And you should be able to select your workspace, right? So the ODOT workspace. So however you have your configuration set up, if you have it in a managed configuration, a custom one, and wherever you end up throwing it into the configuration, you just need to make sure that it can find it, right? Now you shouldn't see any worksets here if you haven't created any yet. That's what this video is going to go over. You do not want to use this button since in the intro video to this playlist, I kind of went over why we need our own application, just because this one couldn't do everything. So go check that out if you haven't. So I'll close this and we'll start the application up. And so again, you can find the application in the workspace folder, standards application, should say OhioDOT create workset.exe. So we will start this application up. And so when you first launch it for the first time, it should be blank. That's because the application doesn't know what workspace you want to create a workset for, since you could have several different copies of our workspace. So before we actually select a workspace, I do want to go over a settings file that it uses when you select the workspace. So for each workspace, you can set up one of these, and so they're located in the local folder, application settings, and then there's this OhioDOT create workset defaults text file. So we open that up. Well, you should see one there. The installer will put this in here for you. That might not be filled out depending on what you chose when you did your installation of our workspace. So the first thing being is if you checked on don't configure, then this third line will not be filled out. It'll just be like equal nothing. It's because you said that you were going to configure it yourself, so I wasn't going to assume anything. Now the default location for workset CFGs is a workset CFGs folder inside the workspace folder, right? So right here. And the installer will create that folder. So what you want to make sure is that wherever you want to put your workset config files, since they all have to be in the same directory, that you set that in this text file, right? You want to make sure that this location is specified. And you want to also make sure that this location that you're telling the application to use to put the workset CFGs is the same location that you're telling your Bentley product to go look here for my workset CFGs. And so that is in the workspace config file, right here, for each workspace in here at the top, where OhioDOT workset CFG location. So you want to make sure those two locations match, right? Because this is when you launch your Bentley product, it reads this config file and says, okay, I'm going to go look here for the CFGs. So obviously, you want to make sure that when you create a workspace, it puts the CFGs at that same location, okay? Which is why I really want to make sure that if you're the administrator of your CAD stuff, that this is set up here, and then you also set this line to false, so you don't allow the end user to change the CFG location within the application, which I'll show that in a second. So making sure these two are set like I just described will ensure that the application will create the workset for you and configure it properly. If this is a different location, like I went over just a second ago, it's going to create it, but your Bentley product won't be able to see what it created, right? So hopefully that made sense. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. So I'll go over the other lines in this application as we go through, or in this text file as we go through the application itself. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is go and say, hey, create worksite application. Here is where the workspace is that I'm dealing with. So I'll hit the search button, pop up here. Let me go and navigate to where my workspace is. So again, I got this demo location going on here. So I'll select my workspace folder. And what it will do is it will read that folder and make sure it has everything it needs in order to create a work set. Okay, if it's missing something, then it won't populate and it'll stay red. It won't let you select a workspace that isn't a valid workspace, right? So it needs to have everything for it to create a work set or allow you to move on. And the results section will tell you everything. I might have overdone it. It does put a lot of results in there. So here's when I first initially loaded it up, there were some blanks. So it was saying, hey, this is blank, this is blank, this is blank. So you can ignore that because it was just your initial load. Here's where after I selected the workspace file, it said it found the settings file and it set some bunch of defaults in there. Here's where it says it validated your stuff. So it might be a little overkill, but definitely when you actually create the work set, you do want to check out results, see if anything failed. So now that this is a valid workspace, it turned green and the next section got enabled. Now, you'll notice that some of these things did fill out, and if you're running it on your end, maybe they didn't get filled out. So this text file where I said make sure you set your CFG location, that's this right here, WorkSet CFG's location, right? And you'll notice that the search symbol is grayed out. This button is not selectable. That is because we set allow WorkSet CFG selection to false. We don't want people to change that, right? It doesn't make sense to change it because it can't change. It has to be the same folder that your workspace is configured to that I just went over like a minute and a half ago. So that it doesn't really make sense to allow your users to change this, and it really makes a lot of sense to make sure you set it to the right location. That will just ensure that your workspaces get configured correctly. Now, the next line here is where do you want to create your actual work set folder, right? So the config file and the folder structure does not have to be in the same spot. So I have put in a default location here, but the installer is going to leave this blank. So if you guys have a certain area, you might want to come here and define this default location to use. So every time you open it up and you select this workspace, it'll read that setting file and it'll pop out that default location in there. So again, this can be wherever you want. It does not matter. So if you wanted to move it somewhere else, I don't know, maybe you have projects folder. So this is going to be the folder that you want the work set to be created inside of, not the actual work set folder itself. So if you wanted your work set created inside this projects folder, you would choose that, and that says, okay, here's where I'm going to create the project at. Now, I didn't go over this. There are two modes. There's a create and modify. I'll touch on the modify mode later. But under the create mode, this is what you're going to see. Now, this drop down, there's only one template, so you don't have to worry about the drop down right now. If maybe in the future, if we ever add another template. Right now, that's our only template, which I went over in the intro video. Now, the last option in this box is to select what Connect or Bentley Connect product you want to use to assign seed files to the work set. So that's the last step of it, and you can set a default program in this dropdown. In the text document, it says last line, default connect product. So this is going to be the display product name, so it has to match exactly or it won't set it. It just won't be able to find it. And it'll tell you when it reads the settings file if it failed to find it or not. Obviously, it has to be installed as well. So real quick, what this means is after the workset gets created, each workset inside our workspace gets seed files for the project, and they have coordinate systems set on those seed files. Now, when you create new files for your project or work set, it will use these seed files. So with Connect Edition, your dgen files can be associated with a work set and workspace. And that is kind of needed, so you can then double click on a dgen file and it will know what configuration to use. But if you don't have the dgen associated, or it's associated to a different work set, when you go to launch it, you're going to get a workspace mismatch warning, and it gets kind of annoying. So if you don't assign your seed files every time you go to create a new file and open it, it's going to say, hey, this file isn't associated with this workspace work set. What do you want to do? Which could get annoying. So that's what this step is going to do. It will make sure that the seed files are associated with the workspace and workset that was just created. So in order to do this, it has to open the Bentley product in the background. So I am letting you choose which Bentley program you want to use to do that association. Now, the caveat here is you have to choose the right program that you have configured up. So if you have a workspace that is specifically for maybe ORD 10.10, and you have another workspace that's for ORD 10.9. I went over this in the install videos with the config overview. But you might have a need to have two different workspaces compatible with each version of ORD you have installed, which most likely means that when you're running, say, ORD 10.9, it won't be able to see workspaces and worksets that are specifically for ORD 10.10. So if you're trying to create a workspace for ORD 10.10 and you choose ORD 10.9, then when you run this background process, it won't be able to find that workspace and workset. Right? So I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you want to make sure you can select that workspace with the Bentley product, because that background process has to load the workspace workset in order to associate it. So if you choose a program that isn't configured to see your workspace and workset, it's not going to be able to associate it. And it'll still create the workset. Everything will be created successfully as long as you check this results section. Just that last step failed of associating the seed files. It's not the end of the world. You just get that annoying message, every time you open that seed file, and you can go into the seed files and manually associate them later. So again, it's not like their workset creation will fail. It's just that last step won't be there, and you have to deal with it manually. But it's not like you still can't use that workset. Okay, that was a long explanation. Let's move on. So the next step is, what do you want to name your workset folder? So by default, it's assuming that it should be a PID, which is ODOT's identifier for a project. It's typically a 6-digit number. So it's expecting you to type in a 6-digit number. If you wanted to do something like, this is state route, 8, blah, 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 where it's not just the PID, you do have to check on non-PID, and then it will let you type in whatever you want. Okay. Now the next step here in this section is to define the coordinate system. So I mentioned earlier the seed files get a coordinate system assigned to them, and then those seed files are used to create all the files for that project. So then all your files for that given work set have the same coordinate system set, or the appropriate coordinate system set, right? So right now you have a north and south zone. Now in the future we will be switching over to our LDP, or county-based coordinate system. So there'd be one for each county. So then when that time comes, you will see this drop-down get populated with all those county choices, as well as in a couple years from now we'll should be switching over to international feed. If that's still the case in a couple years, then you would see an option show up here to define if it's international feed or survey feed should be used for this project. But right now you don't have to worry about that, so you won't see it. So you do want to select that coordinate system, and then you can move on to the next section. So now let me just drag this results section down a little bit. That is enough to hit to actually create WorkSet. The rest are some additional options. So I mentioned in the intro video how you could have multiple survey folders, engineering folders. So if I needed like another survey folder for maybe another company that might be doing work, yeah, I could do company ABC. Same thing for engineering, whatever, XYZ. For each of maybe your consultants that work on a project, they can each have their own folder. And then for engineering, you could create those structure folders, right? So there's bridge, a wall, and a culvert. So bridges are going to expect an SFN number, which is 7 digits. Culverts also 7-digit identifier. A wall would just be 3-digit number for the wall on that project. So you can add more to those as you need, but for smaller projects, you might not need to add any of those extra folders. All right, so that's really all there is to it. So the next step is to actually just create the WorkSet. So I'll hit this Create WorkSet button, and it will first start by copying that folder structure. Then it's going to start creating these extra folders that I defined, and then it's going to start adding in the seed files and any other kind of files that will have in there from the start, like the DTY file or a pset file we have in there as well. And then when it's done, it'll kind of reset, and it's always a good idea to look at the results. So you want to pretty much find where you started the creation. So right here, so it says copy template folder, added survey folder, added 301 folder, added the survey master file to that, created some bridge folders, culvert folders, wall folders, created the additional XYZ 401 folder, and then here's where it started adding in our template files. So there's a pset, ITL, here's your DTY file, here's all the different seed files, DGN seed files that I brought in. It did update the WorkSet config file, or created it. And then the last step is here's where it associated those 4 DGN seed files for the project. Now, if it failed, it would say that it failed to associate one of those seed files or all of them, and it would be red. So I don't see any red, so that's a good sign that everything went correctly or succeeded. So if we jump over to where I said to create this, you're going to see there's projects. So here's the folder structure. There's those extra 30141 folders. If I go look at the WorkSet standards, you'll see there's template library, the seed files, the plot driver, and the GCS file got added there. So it looks like everything went successful. And then just to finish it off, if we go over and look at our WorkSet CFGs, we should see there is that config file that it created. It did throw in at the top what version of the application was used to create this and who was running it, just kind of help you out. And then it also made sure that these are set correctly as well. So it set the actual location of the folder structure here. So I call this out because if you do go and manually move the folder structure after it's created, say for some reason you didn't like where you put it and you moved that folder structure somewhere, you have to make sure that you come up to the config file and fix it so that this path is wherever you move that folder to, right? Or when you go to open the file or do something in the project using the Belling product, you're going to start running into problems because it won't be able to find the actual folder through the configuration. Okay. So moving back to the application, the last thing would be the modify mode. So if I switch over to modify mode, this doesn't do a whole lot, but what you have to do is say, hey, where is your WorkSet? So if I go over to where I created my WorkSet, the X drive, so I threw those there. So I'll select this folder. It's going to read it to make sure it's a valid WorkSet. So if for some reason you chose the wrong folder or something, it wouldn't let you select it. Now you can't change the name or anything. The only thing you can really do is add more folders. So I decided to not let you remove a folder after it's created. I felt like that wasn't a good idea because it's a real easy way to lose data. So this application will not delete these extra folders that you've added. So if you added a 301, you're not gonna be able to remove it. You have to handle that on your own outside the application. I didn't want to have people accidentally deleting stuff they didn't mean to delete. But you can easily add more if you needed to. So the modified mode is really just to add additional folders. If you needed to add another engineering folder or whatnot, or another bridge folder, all that can be done. And then you would just hit modify. Oops. Then you hit modify, and it would just go and make those additional folders for you. Last thing, I forgot to mention the help. So this will take you to our wiki page. There's also an about, so you can see kind of what version you're running. The wiki page will have this video and the documentation on it. I always like to reiterate that the documentation PDF file is not a how-to guide. It is to document everything within it. So if you're wondering what this button does, or what this button does, or what this text box means, that's what the documentation is for. It's to document all of the given features and options within the application. The videos are intended to show you how to use the application and walk you through it. Just to recap, it seemed like a long video, but at the bare minimum, it's really easy to create a work set. You can come in here, because the next time you open this application, it will remember your last used workspace location. So that would already be filled out. So you open it, it'll know to use that since that's your last one. It'll read the workspace settings file automatically. So then all these would get populated out if you have them set. So all it would be left to do is literally open the application, type in your PID, and hit create workset. That's how easy it could be. So hopefully this is useful to you guys and beneficial for you, and streamlines the process.